The community for World of Warcraft was one of the most well-renowned and vibrant communities on the internet, and definitely in gaming. I mean, just look at these old forum posts. Look at this guy. Now that's colorful content if I ever did see some. It's one of the things people fought for the most when wanting classic WoW back was to get the sense of community. But what was good about the community in the first place? And then what happened to the game to make it not so good? Well, to look at that, we need to be able to look at vanilla WoW and realize exactly what it was that made the community special. See, back in 2004, WoW was a very unique MMO. Unlike EverQuest or Ultima Online, it was actually fairly casual to get into. You didn't lose experience on death, you could run back to your corpse, and you could solo most of the content. And that may seem like it's a counterpoint. Like, why am I mentioning that? But it's actually really important. See, Blizzard knew it was important not to force people to join groups. They had to make people want to join groups. Because nobody, and I mean nobody, likes group projects. And so, they made this world in which you could solo the content. You could level up your professions, you could do epic quest chains, you could do a whole bunch of stuff by yourself. But they also made dungeon content. And they also had elite mobs, which you couldn't tackle by yourself. And they had these quests that had these really cool items that you'd be able to get. Like the Gazrilla quest chain. Now this quest chain, just to experience what it was, okay, for those of you that don't know, you had to travel across the world, you had to go to the hinterlands, you had to fight a bunch of elite trolls in this giant, huge temple, you had to stop this sacrifice from happening and go and beat everybody up, and then you had to go to this dungeon and summon this hidden boss, which is like Gazrilla. He's like a Godzilla monster, and you gotta fight him. Ooh, you gotta fight him. And then you punch him in the face, and you kill him. And then you go back, and you turn it into the gnome dude, who's like, oh, thanks for the scale of Gazrilla. And you do it, and do the thing, and you get a carrot on a stick. But it made your mount go faster by 3%, and it might not sound like a lot, but back in the day, that basically meant that you were God. You could do whatever you want to. You were like Flash. You could just run around as much as you wanted to. It was amazing. And that's just one of the things, right? That's just one item from one quest chain. I mean, there was elite gear, there was pets, there was mounts you can get, a whole plethora of things that you'd get for doing these group outings that you couldn't do by yourself. It encouraged you to actually experience the game. And that's one of the other things about the gameplay that was fantastic, was that it actually had a sense of difficulty to it. Unlike modern WoW, where it's streamlined and very easy to solo pretty much all the leveling content as well as most of the world quests and various other things, vanilla World of Warcraft actually made it so that way you had to get a group of individuals who were like-minded to go out and do these quests. Oh, I want a carrot on a stick too. Or, oh, I want to kill those ogres. I want to go into this dungeon. Well, awesome. Let's posse up and go. And the way that you found groups was actually kind of a nice RPG element back in the day. See, you'd have to go to town or to a local hub and just spam in chat looking for group to go to Nomergon, or looking for group to kill Gazrilla, looking for group to fight Zsa Zsa Gabor's floating head. And you'd find people who said, oh yeah, I've been looking for a group for 5 hours, let's go do it. And then you'd go and you'd walk to the dungeon. That was the RPG aspect of the game. You had to go to the inn to find a group of people to go slay the dragon. You couldn't just push a button like you do nowadays in Dungeon Finder or looking for raid and then find something. When Dungeon Finder was introduced to the game, it wasn't necessarily the most egregious thing in the world. A lot of MMOs have added in a Dungeon Finder. But it took away the roleplay aspect of finding a group. There's something special about going to town and spending time to put together a group, spending time to get to know the people that you're playing with, traveling to the destination together, going into the dungeon, and then spending hours clearing the content together. It could take a long time to be able to go ahead and take out an entire dungeon. It's not like today where everything's streamlined. And I'm going to say that word a lot. Streamlined is the exact terminology to use when it comes to current World of Warcraft. And that is really the crux of the issue. Blizzard decided that questing, as well as all dungeons, needed a carrot on a stick effect to be able to move it as fast as possible. And that's not necessarily the best thing for an MMO. You want people to be able to take their time to enjoy the world. I mean, if people want to go fast, people are going to find a way to go fast. Look at the speedrunning community. People speedrun Final Fantasy VI, for God's sake. One of the longest games in the world. They just speedrun it. They glitch through. I mean, it takes less time for a speedrunner to get a game done than it does for somebody to throw their career away on Twitter. And play the game how you want to play the game. But taking your time to do something is not a bad thing. Especially if the content is designed around careful planning and execution. Dungeons used to be designed in such a way that they would encourage you to communicate with your partners. You would have to have a mage polymorph somebody or have the rogue sap somebody. These things would need to happen in order to allow the dungeon to become successful. And if you pulled more than one pack of mobs at a time, then you'd better pray to Zeus's mighty nipples to be able to save you, because nobody else would be able to. Nowadays, everything is just easy. You can just go into the dungeon. The tank doesn't have to worry about aggro because he'll always have it. You just run from the beginning to the end. All the dungeons are designed basically as a straight line corridor, and that's it. You're done. You push the button for Dungeon Finder and you get your loot. You don't talk to the people that you're with because you don't have to. You just kill everything. And the communication, or lack of communication in this case, is a huge problem. You see, back in the Wayback Day, in the time of your pomp and circumstance, communication between players happened on an individual server, which meant that players had reputations they had to uphold. If you were an asshole, and I mean a real asshole, you would just steal gear and you'd be a jerk to people and who knows what else, you'd be blacklisted from guilds. You'd be told that you can't raid or go on dungeon groups with these people anymore. It simulated an actual society in which you had a reputation to uphold. You had to make sure that you weren't being a jerk to people. But now with Dungeon Finder being cross-realm, which meant that you no longer had to group with people from your individual server to do dungeons, you could do whatever you wanted. The gloves are off. You could steal gear and leave early. You could just say, oh, I didn't get the drop I wanted, and just book from the dungeon immediately. If you didn't like the people you were playing with, or maybe you thought that they just weren't good enough, there was no time sink in finding them. There was no investment to be able to get these people into your group in the first place. So instead of taking the time to maybe try to help out the tank who doesn't know exactly what he or she is doing, you could instead just ditch the group. It's the tank's problem. They've got to learn on their own. There was no more need to help other people. You just push a button, get your loot, get out. And when Looking for Raid was introduced, it really put the kibosh on the community. Before Looking for Raid, there were still guild requirements for being able to raid in the first place. If you really wanted to get the raiding experience, you had to find a guild on your server. Even though dungeon finding and cross-realm grouping allowed for certain things to happen, raiding was still really the last bastion of the community. And then all of a sudden that got destroyed. Because apparently Blizzard didn't like the fact that there are still people talking on their game, and they needed to do something about that. So they introduced Looking for Raid, which meant that you no longer had to talk to anybody. Why? Well, Looking for Raid by itself was pretty bad, but when you add in the fact that it's also easier to do Looking for Raid by design, and that you get buffed for doing it, well then why even raid in the first place with anybody else? You could just do everything by pushing a button and having people do it for you. I mean, the gear even looks exactly the same. Sure, it might have worse stats, but if you want to transmogrify your gear to look exactly like the best rating set in the game, you can. There's no prestige anymore. There's no reputations to build. There's no communication. Nobody cares what you do or what you say. It's just a mess. Blizzard might as well not even have servers anymore. They might as well just have everybody log into one giant game. Now, you might be saying to yourself, what about the game world? Right? There's still people in the world to quest with and to see in the first place. You could still see the population in the game world. Well, wrong again, my friend. And it's because they introduced something called Sharding. Now, Sharding, which very aptly sounds like an accidental bowel movement, is actually something that is used to reduce server load. What happens is, if you're in a populated area, you'll instead be shunted off into something called a shard, which means that you're no longer playing on your server, you're actually playing on a shard, which is located nested inside the server. And maybe you see some other players from other servers, but most often you're just in your own shard, doing your own thing by yourself, alone, with nobody else around. Towns seem dead and isolated. Quest hubs seem like they're lonely. You barely see anybody in the game world anymore. And it's because sharding is out of control. Then there's this thing called phasing. And phasing is this mechanic where if you're on a certain quest that requires you to drive a bulldozer through an orphanage and kill children, well, only you can see that particular quest. So these giant epic quest lines that you go on are just you, by yourself, doing whatever it is that you do. You remember how earlier in the video I said you could solo the content in Vanilla WoW, but there was still a lot of content that made you want to group up? Well, now they took out the content that made you want to group up. I mean, why make people play together in an MMO, right? What's the point of making people play together when you can make just as much money off of making people play by themselves? Of course, the funny thing is, Blizzard's actually lost a lot of subscribers since they introduced easier leveling content, no elite quests, looking for raid, and phasing. The bottom line here is that because World of Warcraft has become so streamlined and so easy, there's no need to group up with people anymore. Dungeon Finder, looking for raid, cross realm, there's no need, no desire to group up with anybody anymore. You could just do it all by yourself or have somebody do it for you. And these looking for raid groups, these looking for dungeon groups, you'll hardly ever see those people again, if ever. You might be able to add them to your friends list, but even then, it's not like they're on your server. It's not like it was. You don't have to worry about reputation. You don't have to worry about meeting people. And there's hardly any need to communicate, so you hardly get to know these people anyway. Whereas back in the day, you'd be talking all the time. There's this thing in World of Warcraft that was really well renowned called Baron's Chat. The Barons is this zone in the game that's the largest zone in the game. It's basically the starting zone for the Horde. Everybody from the Horde goes to this zone. And so it was very highly populated. It was this huge expanse. You'd be there for like 15 levels, and everybody would be talking all the time about crazy stuff, you know. And back in the day, it was Chuck Norris jokes. People would spout off about Yo Mama. They'd talk about Mancrick's wife and mislead players as to how to find certain quest objectives. It was beautiful, beautiful chaos. If you could imagine putting 4chan into an MMO chat room, that's Baron's Chat in all of its glory. That kind of stuff doesn't exist anymore. You don't see anybody talking. You don't see anybody communicating or having fun playing together. And the community is so fragmented now that it hardly matters. Servers are basically dead. If World of Warcraft was to introduce dungeons that were actually difficult in some way, that required more communication, that weren't just designed to be speedrun, if World of Warcraft introduced more difficult elite quests that required you to group up with people, if they made sharding less prevalent in the game, these things would go a long way to reintroducing the old style of community. Having servers of people actually communicate with each other is a good thing. That's what forms organic societies, is when you force people to interact with each other like that, when they have to interact. But thanks to the need to streamline all the content, that's no longer the case. Some of those things that were inconvenient, like having to go to town and find a group, having to do things like bringing in a mage to be able to crowd control mobs, or bringing in water and flasks for everybody. Some of these inconveniences actually led to emergent gameplay that made the game better. It's like Blizzard-Activision has decided that simplification is the new way to go for all of their game titles. And I'm not convinced that's the actual right thing to do. But hey, that's just my opinion. Since Classic WoW's coming out on the 27th of August, it looks like a lot of people share my opinion too. I know I'm looking forward to standing in Stormwind saying looking for group 4 more Hogger for a pretty long time. Anyway, thanks for watching my video. Hope you like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. I'm just getting started, so any feedback you have, please leave in the comments. I'll definitely get to reading it. And don't forget to zippity zop, flim flam, mamma jamma.